Are you ready for Daniel? Listen, this is one exciting book. And we've got 12 chapters. We're going to do a chapter a day. And so buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. I love this book. I love it. And one reason why is because it's just told it that exciting is not supposed to come up yet. It's not exciting yet. This book talks about faith, talks about wisdom, talks about courage, talks about respect. And a lot of this is done by teenagers. I mean, by young people. And prophecy, there are 4 different kinds of prophecies mentioned in this book. Number 1 is prophecy fulfilled, and we'll see that even today. And there's prophecy that's given, and you might want to turn the prophecy down a little bit. And there's prophecy that is explained after it's given, and then there's also prophecy that is sealed up till the end of time. And so we've got the whole spectrum of prophecy here. There's repentance and honor and rewards and punishment, and that's just point made. It's exciting. There's some exciting stories in here, and I hope we do it justice in the next this next quarter. And one other thing, it's practical. There are some practical things in this book. I don't know how many times our 2 boys, when they were little, heard these words. Okay, guys, it's time for Shadrach, Meshach, and to bed you go. Now, where can you go to get a reminder of a Bible story and life's instructions all in the same sentence? It came from the book of Daniel, exactly. Okay, what's going on in the world? Let's see what is happening with Israel and with Judah, especially with Judah. Turns out about 120 years earlier, Assyria had taken Israel into captivity. And it's because of their idolatry and just totally neglecting God. And then the Assyrians give away to the Chaldeans, and that's where we start today. And Judah is about to go into captivity. Nineveh has been destructed by Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar is the new king that comes. It's actually Nebuchadnezzar II comes to power. But following the Chaldeans, the Medes take over, and then after the Medes, the Persians. And the book of Daniel deals with all these last 3 different kings. So, as it turns out, there are 4 prophets going on and active at this point in time. And those 4 prophets are Habakkuk and Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Ezekiel and Daniel do all of their prophesying work in Babylon after they've been taken captive. Jeremiah and Habakkuk are still in Jerusalem, and they do a lot of their work. And at one point in time, there were all 4 of them doing something for the Lord at the same time. Now, Jeremiah and Habakkuk are spending their time with Judah, and Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, is just pouring his heart out for them to change their ways. And Habakkuk is doing some of that. But Habakkuk is he's confronting God. And we're going to see in the first chapter of Habakkuk something that I call the State of the Union. He just kind of explains what's going on. Look at this. This is Habakkuk talking, and he's talking to God. He's talking to God. He says, I cry out to you, violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you cause me to look on wickedness? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises. Therefore the law is ignored. Justice is never upheld. The wicked surround the righteous, and justice comes out perverted. Wow. Violence, iniquity, wickedness, violence, more violence, destruction, strife, contention, law is ignored, justice is never upheld. The wicked surround the righteous, justice comes out perverted. 2,500 years later, not much has changed, has it? Not much has changed. And Habakkuk is confronting God. And he said, I cry out to you, and yet you do not save. God answers Habakkuk. And God says to Habakkuk, Habakkuk, if I told you what I was going to do, you wouldn't even believe it. He said, I am going to raise up the Chaldeans. And I'll tell you about it, but you won't believe it. And here's Habakkuk listening to what God says. These are the Chaldeans. They come for violence. Their horde of faces go forward. They collect captives like sand. They mock at kings. And rulers, they're a laughing matter to them. They laugh at fortresses. You think you build a fortress around your city and you're protected? That's nothing to Nebuchadnezzar. And they sweep through it like the wind, and they pass on. They heap up rubble to capture it. But even though they do that, and I'm raising them up to do my work, God says, they still will be held guilty for who they are, because their strength, they think, is their God. And Habakkuk listens to that, and so he still pushes back. And look at this. Oh, I wanted to say one other thing. There's an example of this heaping up rubble to capture it. They sweep through like the wind. The Romans, after they destroyed Jerusalem, they turned their attention to Masada. This is down by the Dead Sea. It was the last holdout. About 1,000 of the Jewish rebels were up on top. And look at the ramp. The ramp is still there. You can still see that. And this ramp, that's about a 1,300-foot rise from the bottom of the floor, desert floor, up to the top of Masada. That dirt was piled up just to be able to get to the top. And that's without a bulldozer, without a dump truck, without excavators or backhoes or anything like that. And so, that's what they would do. This is the Romans doing this to Masada. So Habakkuk says back to God, God, you are eternal. You are my God. You are my Holy One, and you have appointed them to judge. And these next words are mine, but it's the tone of what he says. It's like, may I remind you, your eyes are too pure to approve evil. They deal treacherously, these people, and you are silent when they swallow up those that are more righteous. Wickedness is not in your favor. Why do you favor them? Can you feel the complaint that Habakkuk is? He said, this is not like you, God. And that's why God said, if I tell you what's going to happen, you would not believe it. So, in 604, Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he captures Jerusalem. And he puts up with them so long, and they keep rebelling. He goes back in 586 and destroys the temple. So, with that in mind, I want to say one other thing, and that is the book of Daniel, 12 chapters, but they are not in chronological order. And you can get confused if you don't realize what's going on. The first four, 1, 2, 3, and 4, the small orange circles there, are in order. Chapter 5 is at the end of the Belshazzar king, the writing on the wall, and two different chapters actually occur before that, and that's Daniel's first vision in chapter 7 and chapter 8, and then the writing on the wall, then Daniel's vision in chapter 9, and then the lion's den, which is chapter 6, and then finally Daniel's fourth vision, 10, 11, and 12. So you see, this is going to kind of bounce around. So if you know and understand that, then you can kind of put it in chronological order. Belshazzar, who was the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, he is the king that shows up following Nebuchadnezzar for Daniel's first and second vision, and also the writing on the wall. Okay, that said, we move on. So, now we do Daniel chapter 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Now, this is an interesting entrance to the book of Daniel. The third year, Nebuchadnezzar comes in, he captures Jerusalem, and so God is working behind the scenes. If you were just standing on the sideline and watching this, it would look like an opposing country was coming in and taking over another country. But there's something going on behind the scene, which is how God works. It's not obvious unless you know what's happening behind the scene. And some of the vessels of the house of God he brought into the land. If you remember, well, here's Shinar. Sometimes they talk about the plain of Shinar. It's actually the lower end of the Mesopotamian valley. Other times when Shinar is mentioned, like right now, it is talking more about the city of Babylon itself. 100 years ago, Hezekiah was the king. Isaiah is told by God to go tell Hezekiah that he is about to die. Go get your house in order. Hezekiah turns to the wall, starts weeping, and is just distraught at this news. And because of his pleading and praying, God turns Isaiah around and says, go back and tell him I'm going to give him 15 more years. You remember the story, right? And then he says, just because I'm saying that, watch the shadow on the steps. It's going to go back 10 steps just to prove I'm doing what you say. But he also said to Hezekiah, and after Hezekiah got well, there is an envoy from Babylon that comes up and says, we're glad you're well and everything else. And Hezekiah starts showing off all of his armor and all of the things in his treasury, and he calls them, they're mine, they're mine, they're mine. You can go to the 39th chapter of Isaiah and read about this, and you'll see how many things he just mentions, they're mine, they're mine, they're mine. Isaiah goes back, tells Hezekiah this, behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and all that your fathers have laid up to store to this day, will be carried to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. So that happened 100 years ago, and now this is what's happening in the first chapter of Daniel. Verse 3 and 4. One of the servants of the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, this servant, Aphanaz, was ordered by the king, go get the sons of Israel, some of them royalty, youths with no defect, good looking, intelligent and wise, and already trained in many ways. And teach them the Chaldean literature, teach them the language, provide them choice food and wine. And Daniel's age about this time, the earliest number that I saw was 14. The oldest was somewhere around 17, teenager. How many of you raised a teenage boy? Lots of hands. I bet you had some interesting times, didn't you? We had two young boys. They were 18 months apart. At one time, we had one senior and one junior in high school. We also had an exchange student from Sweden who was a senior. So we had 3 boys in the house. Very interesting times. One morning we get up. It had been raining the night before, and in front of the window inside the house, in one of the boys' rooms, was a muddy footprint facing in. Now, it does not take a rocket scientist in the mind of the parent to realize something has just gone on. I thank the Lord that we have progressed beyond those days. We meaning the parents, okay? But I guess what I'm trying to say is we've all seen young men. They're all over the map. We've got Daniel and his 3 friends, and they're the cream of the crop. We've got some guys that they're from royalty, if they can be. They're good looking, they're strong, they're smart, they're already trained to begin with in some areas. And here we go. Among them, from the sons of Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And to them they were given the following names: Belteshazzar. They added a T-E in there so you won't be confused by the other king, Belshazzar. Belteshazzar was Daniel, and Belteshazzar was actually, the B-E-L, was the chief priest, the chief god of Nebuchadnezzar. And so that might suggest that Daniel was more or less the leader of this group, or at least perceived to be maybe the more outstanding one at the time. Anyway, he is called Belteshazzar. Hananiah is Shadrach. Mishael is Meshach. And I need to scoot my slides in so that the computer doesn't rearrange them for me here. And Azariah was Abednego. Now, Abednego is from the Ishtar god, and Ishtar was the god of love and war. This is reading between the lines. But if they would name Azariah Abednego of love and war, you might say, well, he might be already well developed physically. He looks like a soldier or a warrior, and love, he might be very good, extremely good looking. Think Fonzie in Happy Days. Just somebody who was named after probably what he looked like. And so here's Daniel, the prince, and all of them have this new name. And so now, what were the 4 areas that they were to be indoctrinated in? One was what? Now, if we give a pop quiz here, language is one. Food is second. Literature, here they are: culture, language, food, and religion. These are the 4 categories that they are to be indoctrinated in. But Daniel made up his mind, verse 8, but Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food, or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. How do you think Daniel, at this age, came to this resolve to push back from what is being demanded of him? How do you think that he got to be that way? What do you think? I'm sorry?
What is the diet he had with his family?
Been trained. He knew the law. He saw all of the things that were going on, and he had made up his mind earlier about who he was. Look at this. He saw the food, and he knew the law. What food do you think he saw? Bacon for breakfast, right? Probably had pork chops in the evening, maybe some horse meat. I don't know what it was. Friday, the fish fry for catfish right out of the Euphrates and the Tigris. Whatever it was, Daniel saw the food. He knew the law, said, we have a conflict here. And so there was something about where he had come from. Daniel had grown up under Josiah's reign. How old was Josiah when he started? Sounds like 8, because it is 8. He was 8 years old when Josiah started. So Josiah was reigned as king from 8 years old to when he was 39. Daniel grew up in that same area. They were about the same age. And so look at this. He had seen Josiah overturn Manasseh's and Amon, previous kings, their ways when he was 20. He had reestablished the Passover in times of, like in the times of the judges, 400 and 500 years earlier. And Josiah was said to have walked in David's ways. And Daniel had seen all this power of reform by a young person. He was trained, he had probably good home training, and he had seen what's going on in the nation around him and how a young person. And so Daniel has just seen some things in his life that probably gave him courage to do that. And we knew that God had instilled him in these capabilities. It says, now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, Nebuchadnezzar, who has appointed your food and your drink, for why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. So if the servant goes against the king, how bad is that? Loses his head? I mean, it's not just removed from the office. It's what we do in business nowadays. But you literally lose your life. And so Aponaz was just concerned to the extent that he said, I can't do this. But Daniel, he takes a different tack. What could Daniel have said? John.
We have to remember that when they were being offered this food from the king's table, these were food and drink offerings to the gods of Nebuchadnezzar. And what Daniel was doing here was trying to show the fact that they were not bowing to the gods of the Babylonians. And as much as anything, he was showing that he wasn't going to let the king use them as a pawn. But they were loyal to their God, and they weren't going to submit to the food and the drink of the king, which were offerings to the gods of the Babylonians.
Very good. So the point that John's making is that even the food offerings and things like that by the king was offerings to the gods. And so Daniel is pushing back in that way. Daniel could have said, I'm just not going to do it. I mean, sometimes that's what you have to do. Turns out in this case, it says that he sought permission. And he proposes a solution. Please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. And so Ashpenaz listened, and after 10 days, here's what he saw. They were fatter than all the other youths. So you thought this was a 10-day diet. This is a 10-day diet that you got fatter on and you enjoyed the meal, all right? They were fatter than all the other youths. The overseer continued with vegetables and water, and God gave them knowledge and intelligence in both literature and wisdom, and here's an added benefit, they understood dreams as well, and we'll see the role that plays later. At the end of 3 years, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king talked with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. And as for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all of his realm. Wow. Not a bad diet, right? And then all of a sudden, the last verse in chapter 1 jumps clear to the end of Daniel's life. And it says, and Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So that's from Nebuchadnezzar to Belshazzar to Darius, and now to Cyrus. And so that is the scope now of what we'll be studying with all this. Now, 3 minutes. So what? Romans 15:4 says, these things are written for our instruction. So by learning things of the Scriptures, speaking of the Old Testament, that we might find encouragement and have hope. So we're supposed to pick up something from these stories. What do you see in these stories for us to take home with? I'm sorry?
Start very young in life, being serious.
Start young. Turns out that's number one. You've done quite well. Resolve who you will be early on when there are no times of stress. God tells us this all along, be ready to give an answer. So when somebody asks you, you don't have to figure it out. Find out who you are when you're young and without a pressure around you. So when those opportunities and situations come, you know how to respond. What else? There's 2 more. Yes?
Their foundation for their life was the truth of God.
Yes?
And when we put our faith in the truth of God, we will be blessed.
Yes.
And so it helped them to make the right choices. It helped them to be seen as beneficial in the king's sight because they had the right foundation.
All right, foundation. And that would be number 4, okay? Which is not up there. Yes?
Ancestral eating is always better than the king's latest food.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Ancestral eating is always better than the king's latest food.
Yes. And in fact, if you go back to the first chapter of Genesis, you find out we were all vegetarians to begin with, right? Even the animals, the lions, when they looked at you, they didn't think dinner because you weren't on their menu. So we have that. Here's Daniel. It says he sought permission. Remember in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, if you've got a conflict with somebody, before they throw you into prison, while you're in the way, he said, find a solution. If someone has aught against you, while you're in the way, find a solution if you can, and so that you don't get thrown into prison and have to stay there for a long time. And so here's what Daniel's doing. There's going to be examples here in this book where there's not time to do that, But in this case, Daniel did. He sought permission, and it was granted to him, and it worked out for him. And finally, the last minute here, God is working behind the scenes. He was working behind the scenes to overthrow Judah. He was working behind the scenes to give favor and compassion through the king's servant. And he was, the four guys were given knowledge and intelligence and literature and interpretation and dreams and all of that. And God's still doing that. He's still working behind the scenes. If you think things are going on in this world or just things going on, there are things going on behind the scenes that God is working his plan and will do that until the very end. That's called God's sovereignty. And if he tried to explain it to us, we'd be like Habakkuk. He said, you wouldn't understand all that I'm trying to do. But he's doing it. And to that we say, amen. So that is class for chapter 1. Thank you. And read chapter 2 for next week. Great chapter, big vision, and explanation.